So today we will talk about 18FT 704 garment testing, performance and sustainability. And we are at Unit 1, which talks about essential elements of garment testing. And in the lesson 3, we will talk about management of restricted substances for RSL compliance. Now, when you are talking about the management of restricted substances, we have to incorporate or implement certain measures in the factory for RSL compliance. One of the major area is that recruitment of a proper manager for RSL. So he will take care of total management of the restricted substances in the factory in different production processes. Then we have to screen the chemicals. The chemicals which are to be used, that are to be tested. When new chemicals come into this production process, that must be screened. One of the important area of management of restricted substances also is the purchase of the material. We have to get the declaration from the supplier also that yes, these chemicals what are to be used in the production process or what they have supplied, it is free of any harmful chemicals. So these are the different areas which are to be covered in the management of restricted substances. Now, when you are talking about the implementation part, I was talking about a product safety and compliance manager. So appointment of a product safety or compliance manager is very important. Why it is very important? Because a responsible person who can take care of different chemicals which are used in the factory. He will be responsible for restricted substances related issues in the garment factory. His qualification and capabilities, that's why is very important. He must be graduated in the chemical discipline, chemical engineering or chemistry discipline, and he must have certain experiences in dealing with the factory in different harmful chemicals and their troubleshooting processes. So appointment of a product safety and compliance manager, that's why is very important. Now, what are the areas are to be covered? One is the educational background of the person, must be from the chemistry or textile processing background. I was talking about this. Then he must have a good interpersonal skill for training. So different areas where this training are to be provided. So the person must be very thorough into that because he has to train his own people in the factory. Now, important roles and responsibilities of product safety manager when you are talking. Collection of the data is very important. Then analysis of those data. Then based on the analysis, the observations which he has got, he must communicate it down the line. So those are the areas are to be taken care by this product safety or compliance manager. Now, safety and compliance, when you are talking, the manager must have the ability to establish different chemical related programs which are useful to gather information or implementation of certain good practices in the factory. Now, communication, that's why is very important, and it is important in the factory, and the product safety manager must have that property, that is collection, analysis and communicate the substances related data effectively. Now, one of the major area of concern is the safety aspects of different chemicals. So record keeping is very important. What are the chemicals has been used, their chemical management systems, then the conduction of some training programs, that is also very important for the product safety manager. implementing the good purchase practices. So this is the area where the purchase department will come into the play, and brand has a major role to play in it, and brand has to pass these chemicals. Okay, they must ensure and confirm that the chemicals which are restricted are not used in the factory. That's why there is the importance of the purchase practices in the factory of the chemicals. In doing so, the purchase department, they must communicate about the chemical and the raw material suppliers that their material contain no harmful chemicals or the chemicals which are banned by the brands. So that is very, very important for the purchase department when they are purchasing different chemicals or substances which are used in the garment industry in different processing stages. Now, in this case, the proper restricted substances compliance declarations are very, very important from the chemical or substances suppliers. So they must give the compliance declarations regarding the restricted substances, and those substances or harmful materials are not present in their chemicals. So in this way, they have to give one compliance declaration. So purchase department has to be careful while purchasing any material, and the supplier has to be communicated accordingly. To maintain and study, this is very, very important in the garment industry, especially the chemical processing areas. Chemical related documents that must be maintained carefully. Then very important area is that brand restricted substances list. Now each brand who are operating in the apparel industry, they are having own restricted substances list which are there in their manual. So the factory which is working for that particular brand, they must have this list with them, and the factory has to be careful that the finished products which are produced that do not contain those restricted substances. So they have to be carefully maintain and study those chemical related documents. Then comes the material safety data sheet or SDS safety data sheet, technical data sheet. These are very, very important. While choosing the chemicals, one must have this safety data sheet with them. How to use those chemicals safely, how to apply them safely, and what are the precautions need to be taken. Documents are very, very important, and that must be updated on regular basis. So those are the very important area in this particular management of the restricted substances. Now, chemicals related documentations, when we are talking, we talk about the material safety data sheet, number one. We talk about the technical data sheet, then restricted substances compliance agreements. So these are the very, very major areas. Then comes the restricted substances test reports. Now, what are those reports? This is nothing but the finished garment. When the garment is produced in the factory and it is in the final stage, so before it is going for the packing, it must be tested, and testing is done for the restricted substances. As we have already mentioned, the different areas are there, and these restricted substances will be dependent on the list or the RSL list of different buyers. So those restricted substances test reports are to be generated accordingly. Now, when we are talking about these restricted substances documentations or the chemical related documentations, the main purpose is to analyze the hazardous chemicals into the different chemicals which are used in the processing, and this must be reflected in the technical data sheets, the different aspects of those chemicals, instructions, what are the instructions are there to use those chemicals. So these are coming under chemicals related documentations. Now this type of documentation one must create and one must record it and periodically review those documents. Restricted substances compliance agreements must be reached between the factory and the supplier. So if any product comes to the factory, there must be a compliance agreement with that particular supplier, and this documentation must contain the detailed test report. It is not only the pass or fail test reports, all the different parameters like azo test, bandamine test, or the allergenic dispersed test, formaldehyde test. So all this restricted substances testing, that must be incorporated in the test report. Then only it will be a complete report. Now, chemical related documentation, when you are talking, the phasing out and substitution of chemicals is very, very important. Now, in the case of determination of any kind of restricted substances in any product, factory has to take the initiative to substitute that with some other chemical. So that's why phasing out and substitution of chemical is very, very important aspects. And while it is done, a proper action plan must be prepared by the factory. So compliance manager will take a lead role into it. So supplier declarations and laboratory testing. So those are the two very important areas in these restricted substances, and one must be very careful while handling such kind of laboratory testing data or the supplier declarations. This is also important for screening of inputs for restricted substances. Some new chemicals are coming, so very, very important, before applying one must test those products. Okay, so that's why the screening is very, very important of those products. Supplier declaration of different chemicals, as we have already mentioned, restricted chemical groups which are to be avoided by the supplier, that must be declared. Unintentional contamination should not be there in the garment. Now, while testing of finished article for restricted substances, the testing must be done in a third-party testing laboratory and it must be monitored. Reduction and elimination process is very, very important of those restricted substances. So those testing must be done in such a way that if it is getting detected, those restricted substances, those chemical must be reduced or eliminated from the production chain. So this is important aspects while talking about the testing. There must be a testing plan for finished articles. So what are the testing needs to be carried out? It all depends upon the type of process, type of substrate, type of chemicals used. It is not fixed for any kind of garment or any kind of processes. It all depends, and it is very dynamic in nature. It must be regulated correctly based on the substrate and based on the process. Like different type of items are there, it must be screened and tested, like different garment, different accessories like zippers which are used. So those are the things are to be monitored, or different accessories which are used in the garment. So those are to be screened and tested, so before dispatch. And there may be some other components should be there also in the garment. Those must be also screened and tested. So the finished garments, that's why is very, very important in RSL testing. Now fabric with dyed yarn, sometimes these also cause some problem in terms of band amines which can be found there. So fabric with dyed yarn, so their band amines can be found, zips, that is the zippers, then polyester button where these band amines can be found. So one must be very careful and handling those material. Now when we are talking about different chemicals, allergenic dispersed dyes, as we have already tested, one has to be careful. Isocyanates, which is used in the polyurethane coating or PU coating in fabric and yarn, PU foam or PU based components, it is also available. So isocyanates must be tested or checked. Now pigment printed fabric also needs to be checked for the phthalate. Pigment printed fabric, PU and PVC. Okay, some lacquered components are also to be checked in this fashion. Now grey fabric and yarn also needs to be checked thoroughly for chlorophenols. So chlorophenols are used as some preservative agents. APOs needs to be checked, as we have already discussed. All types of fabric and yarn, all types of metallic, non-metallic trims, it should be checked. Cadmium, lead and nickel, that must be checked for this. So all metals must be checked thoroughly for heavy metals. The training is very, very important for internal and the chemical supplier also. So training must be done correctly. So a group of teams should be there who are training, giving the training in different risk areas of restricted substances and chemical management systems. Training of the workers also is very, very important for safe handling, use of the chemicals, etc. So training of workers, good practices in workplace, chemical handling, these are the areas are to be covered there. Then safety aspects are to be also covered into mock drills on fire, some medical emergency, first aid, etc. So those are covered while handling those chemicals. So training of workers plays an important role here. Then response to spillage, leakage of the chemicals also is very, very important area. And chemical substances screening of the new chemicals is always important there. So one must test all the new chemicals before it is going into the production. So these are the areas, intentional use of the chemicals, the different restricted substances. One should not use that chemical if there is some restriction is there of screening of these new chemicals. So screening of the new chemicals also contains final article, because it will reflect in the final article. So confirmation must be there. So database, finally it is very, very important to take the corrective action of certain chemicals. So database plays an important role while handling different chemicals for corrective action. So root cause analysis has to be done if anything has to be tracked from the past experience, and recurrence of the different type of observations are to be avoided. So summary talks about the management of restricted substances. We have seen the appointment of a product safety compliance manager, good practices has to be given, then screening of input chemicals are to be applied, then testing of the chemicals are to be there, preparedness should be there when restricted substances are found in the garment. So these are the areas covered under the summary of this lesson 3. Thank you.